Good morning. I have a little presentation for you this morning called America Eclipsed. So let me explain. Whenever we have a new moon, a quarter moon, or a full moon, those days tend to be a little bit more intense than other days. And any squares or oppositions or conjunctions that occur on those days tend to impact us a little bit more. But when we get to an eclipse occurs when sun and moon are conjunct the lunar nodal axis, and eclipses are even more intense than the new moons, full moons, and quarter moons. So eclipses tend to impact us for quite a while. And over the next few years, we're going to have a lot of eclipses that impact quite a bit with America. And so I want to take a look at those charts from basically now through 2029. And that will give us an idea of what issues are going to be impacting America. Uh, we'll also look at a few transit charts that are related to important conjunctions and squares and stuff. So, should be an interesting presentation. Let me see if I can share my screen. And this will take just a second to get started. I have to get rid of some panels so I can see what's going on. So we're almost there. And here we are, America Eclipse, 2025 through 2029. Now, first, I'm just going to look at some transit-to-transit aspects to get sort of an overall idea of what's coming up for the world. And let's see, we're halfway through, a little more than halfway through 2025. So in 2026, on February 20th, we have Saturn conjunct Neptune. And as I have pointed out elsewhere, this is not going to be your typical conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. Those conjunctions happen about every 36 years, and they usually represent some big social changes as old structures dissolve and new visions come in. And sometimes those visions are good and sometimes they're bad. No, but this one will probably be much more powerful. It happens in the first degree of Aries, which places it on that world axis, that cardinal axis. And the last time we had a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in the first degree of Aries was about 6,000 years ago, in the year 4361 BCE, before the Common Era. And that was around a time that historians call the dawn of civilization, when writing and calendar systems began to develop. So you could look at that and say, at best, humanity is on the cusp of another big evolutionary leap. At worst, though, it's just finishing its cycle. Had a good run for 6,000 years, and now it goes away. I think we'll continue, but there are going to be some problems the next few years. Also, in 2026, we have Uranus square the nodal axis, and Uranus often stirs up revolutionary forces. But we also have Uranus in Gemini, which is going to be very inventive. And so on the plus side, this could inspire people and spur on new inventions and new creative ideas. Let's see, when we get into the latter part of 2027, first part of 2028, we have Pluto conjunct the North Node, the nodal axis square Chiron, and Saturn square the nodal axis. So that is all going to intensify things. These processes of frustration, restriction, wounding, and transformation occurring in latter part of 2027 and 2028, and this impacts the entire world. About mid-2028, we have Saturn conjunct Chiron. That, I believe, is going to take place in Taurus, and that sometimes brings about new religious movements. And with Saturn conjunct Chiron in Taurus, and Taurus being connected with earthly pleasures, sensual delights, we could be seeing a movement or toward individual joy, a personal religion based upon joy, not hedonism necessarily, but realizing that joy itself is a spiritual experience. And then 2028, 2029, we have Saturn square Pluto. That's usually pretty hard. Pluto, death and transformation. Saturn, restriction, regulation, frustration. And we have Pluto square Chiron. Now, Chiron is associated with both wounding and healing. It's actually, in my opinion, a drive inside of us to transcend the visible world and to seek the invisible spiritual realm. It's this little voice inside of us that looks at the world and says, is this all there is? Surely there must be something more than this. But nonetheless, in 2028, 2029, we're probably going to experience a certain amount of frustration, upheaval of infrastructure, and then Pluto square Chiron. Historically, that sometimes brings about wounding, but it can also historically has brought about healing. So this could turn out quite well, and we have a whole series of these squares in 2028, 2029. Okay, now if we look at some of the good aspects over this period, the main thing that's happening are the favorable aspects between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that has all begun this summer. We have Uranus making a sextile to Neptune, Neptune making several sextiles to Pluto, and Pluto making a trine to Uranus. So they are completing this double sextile trine triangular configuration. And it's going to be particularly strong in 2026 and 2027 when we get a lot of overlap here. And this represents good coordination between the drives represented by these outer planets. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern, Neptune dissolves the boundaries, and Pluto is the phoenix rising from the ashes. From the destruction of the old, something completely new arises. And this is all going to be reminiscent of a period, I think it was in around 576 BCE, before the Common Era, when for a few years we had a series of conjunctions between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that period gave birth to a series of major religions. The Jews, the Israelites, were in exile in Babylonia, and while there, they wrote down the Torah. They committed the Torah to print. Taoism, Confucianism emerged. Some of the Upanishads were written. It was a golden age of Greek philosophy that began. So these kind of configurations open up people's minds. Everyone will feel their mind expanding a little bit. Some who are into meditation, who are more spiritually advanced already, will achieve a much, much greater enlightenment. We could see new philosophies and movements emerge. And with Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus in Gemini, Neptune in Aries, we're going to see tremendous advances in technology and invention over the next few years. And with Neptune in Aries, the goal will be to turn these visions into reality. Also, children born during these years, many of them will be extraordinary. The more exact these aspects between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are, the more extraordinary these children will be when they grow up because they are going to be hardwired for this more transcendent view of the world and reality. Okay, now these are some hard aspects transit to natal, and the natal chart I'm comparing these transits to is the July 2nd, 1776 chart for the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was passed by the Continental Congress on July 2nd. It was printed and made public on July 4th. But it really all began on July 2nd, so I tend to have a preference for that chart. But the July 4th chart works also, particularly the Sibley chart for July 4th. Most of what I talk about will apply to both charts unless it's an aspect to the natal moon, because the moon will be very different in those two charts. Since the July 4th chart is when the Declaration of Independence went public, I see that more as a chart representing America's persona. It has moon and Aquarius, and we like to see ourselves and project ourselves as this nation that has very advanced technology, and we export freedom and democracy around the world, and we're very charitable and humanitarian. That's our persona, and that's the way we often are. But the July 2nd chart has Moon in Capricorn, and that says a lot about our inner nature. If you look at that chart, and if you look at America's history, you can see that throughout its history, America has often been very controlling of not only its own people, but also other countries. America has oppressed blacks and Native Americans and other minorities. We're treating immigrants very badly these days. Surely some of those immigrants are bad people, but the majority are not. They're just people. And we have engaged in assassinations and overthrows of other governments for our benefit in the past. We don't do that overtly these days, but we try and use other political tools to often coerce other nations to do our bidding, just as Trump is trying to do with tariffs, which brings about hardship not only for other countries, but also for the American people. Because despite what Trump says, it's the importer that pays the tariff. It's an American company that will pay that tariff and then ultimately pass on those costs to the consumer. Okay, so throughout most of this presentation, I'll use that July 2nd chart for America, but there will be at least one instance where I will use the July 4th, 1776 Sibley chart. Now, if we look at this overview of tensions created by transits for America from 2025 through 2029, and 2025, 2026, we have Neptune square Venus. That tends to create some passionate and fanatical beliefs among the American people. Venus, among other things, it represents our nonverbal right brain, the things we value and how we feel about things. Neptune creates some confusion, some disinformation, and fanaticism and passion about those beliefs. We'll also have Saturn square Venus about the same time, so people are going to feel restricted and frustrated. And then we have Chiron making a square to Mercury and to the moon. And Mercury, among other things, rules commerce and trade, so American people are probably going to feel very wounded as a result of these tariffs. Trump announced his all these tariffs on April 2nd. I think he called that Liberation Day. The stock market immediately dropped, and we would have probably felt a lot of inflation, higher prices, and wounding in May, if not for the fact that Trump backed off and delayed some of those tariffs. But now things are into full effect. So when we get into October of 2025, I am anticipating a lot of economic wounding in America. Uh, Inflation, prices going higher as a result of those tariffs. And then we have Chiron squaring Mercury and the Moon again in March of 2026. Now, in 2026, a little into 2027, we'll have the lunar nodal axis, that transiting lunar nodal axis, square Uranus. And Uranus and Gemini in America's chart often gets us involved in conflict, either at home or abroad. Uranus is in Gemini, that's the Revolutionary War for us. So this stimulates people to revolt. Chiron square Pluto, we actually had a very close but not exact square between Chiron and Pluto in August of this year. I think it'll continue into September. We'll see later on. That can wound America's power and wound the American president or other powerful leaders more specifically. And we have seen Trump's power being wounded a bit of late. So we might see more of that in May of 2026, November of 2026, and March of 2027. And then we also have some periods where Saturn, transiting Saturn, will be in opposition to natal Saturn. And it's going to be a very extended period in 2026 because right about the time that this becomes exact, I think it's on maybe July 23rd, Saturn will be slowing down just about to turn retrograde. And so we immediately after that, a week later, we have another exact opposition on the 29th. And we'll see this later on also, but this will be a period where America can have to face some of its karma. There can be restriction, frustration, and some of these Saturn aspects in the past have triggered acts of mass violence as the frustration just causes some people to snap. Okay. Later in 2027, 2028, Saturn's going to be causing a lot of frustrations as it's square Mercury, square the Moon, square Pluto. That could cause or represent a lot of coming economic pain and more restrictions on the president or America's power. And we have a series of Uranus returns, transiting Uranus conjunct natal Uranus. And that's very worrisome because, again, historically, America has this tendency to be involved in conflict either abroad or at home. during Uranus returns. In the past, when Uranus was at 8 degrees Gemini, we had the American Revolution, the Civil War, and we already had gotten involved in World War II, but we got deeply involved in the Manhattan Project, producing the bomb. And let's see, in October of 2027, the transiting lunar nodal axis will be conjunct the lunar nodal axis in America's chart. Doesn't matter if you use the July 2nd or July 4th, 1776 chart, it's going to be the same. So that is going to probably exacerbate all these other tensions related to Saturn and Uranus. And then in 2028, 2029, Pluto will do a series of conjunctions with the South Node in America's chart. And that tends to produce a lot of big social change and transformation. Also, the transiting North Node will be conjunct Pluto in April of 2028. So that is going to make this Pluto lunar nodal axis thing even more intense. And then we have other aspects that will be stimulating the nodal axis. We have Saturn will be square the nodal axis in 2028, 2029, and Chiron will be square the nodal axis also in 2028, 2029, and this one on, let's see, 2028, it looks like it lasts perhaps June through September. It's going to be ongoing for quite a while, so that could cause some intense wounding. Overall, 2027 and 2028 may be the most dangerous years coming up for America. 2026 is when tensions start to increase, when things will probably start to get worse. Now, if we look at the progressions for America's July 2nd, 1776 chart, we see some similar things for the progressed Sibley chart. They just happened a few months earlier. But 2026, 2027 will have progressed Sun square Mars. That suggests America taking a more aggressive stance toward things. Fortunately, progressed Venus will be sextile Jupiter, and that can make things more pleasant. So there may be some sweetness, some underlying sweetness to things in 2026 and 2027. And despite this square between progressed Sun and Mars, and despite some of the harsher transits that would be going on. So this is some good news. There will be a little bit of sugar to help soften the blow. Now in 2028, 2029, we have progressed Venus square the lunar nodal axis, so that intensifies our feelings about things. And we saw that transit-wise, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on with that lunar nodal axis. And we also have transiting Sun in opposition to natal Neptune in the July 2nd and July 1776 charts. Neptune and Mars are square. And that has created this tendency for Americans to get involved in conflicts based on fanaticism and passionate feelings about things. So whenever Neptune is being stimulated, it's not always a good sign for America. And we're going to see, I think, later on around the same time period, Neptune, I think, making a square to the natal Sun in the USA chart. Something involving Sun and Neptune will be coming up around this time, in addition to what's going on in the progress chart. So we'll see that later. Fortunately, progress Venus will be making a sextile to the midheaven. So that will be beneficial toward America. And that, again, may soften some of these other blows. Okay, but some interesting times definitely lie ahead. Okay, now, if we look at the rest of 2025, we've been through this first half, so I'll start down here. You can see Transing Chiron has been very close to a square with Pluto. It doesn't become exact, but this has been lasting July and August and into September of this year. So in this period, I've noted there has been more opposition to Donald Trump, and the president has been wounded more. And you could also say he's wounding America and weakening our power around the globe. Now, in October of this year, we have a lot of things going on. We have transiting Neptune square Venus, that'll be exact. And then we have transiting Chiron square Mercury, transiting Chiron square the moon. So this is why I think Americans may start to feel the economic pain of these tariffs pretty strongly in October, and this will cause a lot of right brain dissatisfaction and fanaticism and strong feelings about what is going on. Okay, now we have a whole series of solar and lunar eclipses that are going to be interacting with America's chart, this July 2nd, 1776 chart, quite a bit. And you're going to see a lot of themes repeated over and over. Things having to do with dissatisfaction, wounding, and fanaticism. So here, lunar eclipse coming up on September 7th, 2025, transiting Saturn, Neptune, or square natal Venus. People are going to feel frustrated, restricted, and fanatical and passionate in their beliefs about things. Also, transiting Chiron, using a 1-degree orb, it's not quite squaring Mercury, Neptune, or Pluto, but it's going to be conjunct the Mercury-Pluto midpoint. You can see that here, just 11 minutes from exact. And it's going to be square the Moon-Pluto midpoint, just 8 minutes from exact. So that is going to also represent some wounding that will begin. Wounding probably economically for Americans, and wounding for the presidency, and wounding of America's power. We have a solar eclipse on September 21st of this year, and same things going on, Saturn, Neptune, square Venus, and now Chiron's close enough to be squaring pretty much the moon and almost within 1-degree orb of squaring Mercury. So these eclipses will represent most likely the start of some of this economic pain caused by the tariffs and a rise in dissatisfaction. And if you look at polls, the recent polls that the Pew Research Organization has done, they show that most Americans are very, very unhappy with a lot of Donald Trump's policies and actions. Okay, on October 13th, 2025, we have transiting Chiron square Mercury, moon, pretty strong. We have transiting Neptune square natal Venus, pretty strong. You can see here 25, 25, 25, 0 degrees, 0 degrees. And transiting Sun at 20 degrees Libra, it'll be opposite natal Chiron at 20 degrees Aries. These are very strong aspects. The transit by the sun acts as a trigger, and there is a very heightened risk of wounding for Americans at this time. If I were looking at this chart 10 years ago, I would say, well, yeah, there's going to be this heightened risk of wounding, but I don't know where the wounding will come from. When we get closer to an event, an astronomical event, we can see more clearly what's going on in the world. That gives us a better idea of what will actually happen. So given that the tariffs are beginning to take their toll, it's very likely that a lot of this wounding will be economic wounding caused by the tariffs, which may be producing stagflation in this country. A stagnant economy, economic growth coupled with higher inflation. Okay. I often liken these things to the spaghetti maps for hurricanes. At the very start, if you go further into the future, all those models often diverge quite a bit from one another. But as we get closer to a point in time, the models tend to converge and we have a better idea of what's going to happen. The same thing happens with astrology. 10 years out, I would have no idea what the wounding would be, but when we get closer to this aspect, we can see the writing on the wall much more clearly. Of course, wounding could come from some other sources too that we're not aware of so far. Now, when we get to 2026, let's see what's going on here. The lunar nodal axis will be square Uranus. It becomes exact in March, but it's going to last throughout January, February, March, and April. So this will probably bring about some rebellions in America, protests at the very least. Maybe some violent actions, revolutionary actions. But all in all, people are going to probably want to revolt. The lunar nodal axis intensifies things. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern. People are not going to be satisfied. And this is exact on the 22nd, but on the 20th and 22nd, we also have Chiron square Mercury and Chiron square Moon becoming exact. So March is probably going to be a very intense month in America. We have Chiron square Pluto in late April, most of May, and again from about mid-October through mid-December. That can cause wounding to both the presidency and America's power. And these aspects here, these are sort of like the bookends for these other aspects. We have Saturn square Sun. That brings about restriction and frustration. And we have transing Saturn in opposition to natal Saturn. Now, a little bug in the program has reversed these dates because transing Saturn square natal Saturn, that will be exact on July 23rd. So the 23 should be over here. And then it is exact again on July 29th. And this opposition is going to be lasting over 2 months, almost 2.5 months. And we get two exact oppositions so close to one another because in between the 23rd and the 29th, Saturn turns retrograde, so it's moving very slowly at this point. So summer of 2026 is going to be a most likely very frustrating period for Americans. a period of frustration and restriction. And that is, we have the wounding to the presidency as bookends to all of this frustration. Okay, if we look at the eclipses in 2026, again, you're seeing a lot of stuff repeated here. We have Saturn and Neptune still making a very strong square to natal Venus. And the lunar nodal axis is making a strong square to Uranus. So this is going to be feelings of frustration, restriction, fanaticism, and passionate beliefs. And people will be feeling this itch they have to scratch. It's something is irritating them and nudging them toward revolution. Now, there's one positive way this could turn out also, since Uranus is in Gemini. Aside from revolution, this also tends to bring about inventiveness. So for those who are scientists and inventors, this intensity could be channeled in that direction. But in general, I'm expecting more protests, more people revolting in one way or another once we get into 2026. Okay, now this solar eclipse is just 3 days before the exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and that is going to intensify the impact of that conjunction more. And that conjunction is really going to intensify fanaticism and passionate beliefs in America. And at the same time, of course, we have transiting lunar nodal axis squaring Uranus, making revolution of all sorts more likely. We have a lunar eclipse on March 3rd, 2026. And again, we see a lot of themes repeated. Transiting Chiron will be square this Mercury-Moon opposition, wounding people, healthcare system, the economy. Lunar nodal axis still strongly squaring Uranus. And let's see, if we look at the transits just a few days later, a couple of weeks later, on March 21st, 2026, Chiron is going to be making, let's see, it's near exact to square to the Mercury and to the Moon. Again, wounding of economy and healthcare. And the transiting lunar nodal axis and Mercury are now both strongly squaring Uranus. So springtime in America 2026, it's also going to be rather problematic. Wounding, healthcare takes the toll. People are ready to revolt. When we get to transits on May 2nd, 2026, transiting Chiron will be making exact square to natal Pluto. So, as I said, that could wound America's power and Donald Trump's power. And transiting Jupiter is going to be pretty strongly square natal Chiron. So we have wounding being stimulated in two different ways. It could, of course, represent as healing and transcendence, but given the masses involved, it'll more likely involve wounding. Okay, let's look at transits on July 23rd, 2026. We have transiting Saturn, exactly opposite natal Saturn, and transiting Saturn is just about to turn retrograde. And here you can see from about the last week of June through August, This opposition is going to be very strong. It becomes exact on the 23rd. Then Saturn turns retrograde and it's exact again on the 29th. So it will be a long, hot summer for America. A lot of frustration and maybe a lot of shortages. And on the 29th of July, we again have that exact opposition, and Saturn has turned retrograde on the 23rd. It hasn't turned retrograde yet, but in that week from the 23rd to the 29th, it turns retrograde. It's moving very slowly. That increases the impact. And these sorts of oppositions to natal Saturn, they have often in the past coincided with things like mass shootings too, as people just reach a breaking point. Okay, we have a solar eclipse on August 12th, 2026. Again, you can see Saturn is still in tight opposition to natal Saturn, and the eclipses of this period, they are going to intensify the impact of this opposition. On the 27th, we have a lunar eclipse. Saturn is still within 1 degree orb of opposition to natal Saturn. Venus is making a strong opposition to natal Chiron, and that can act as a trigger for wounding and frustration, mass shootings, and who knows what else. Other events related to the frustration and restriction that Americans may be feeling at this time. On November 11th, looking at transits, the square between transiting Chiron and natal Pluto is going to be exact. So this is another period where America's power and Donald Trump's power can be wounded. And this takes us to the transits for 2027, which is going to be a very active year. Let's see, we have Saturn square Sun, frustration, Chiron square Pluto, wounding of America in the presidency. Pluto, it says opposition the North Node, which means it's conjunct the South Node. And this is worrisome. It's going to be lasting a long time here, and a lot of social transformations and upheavals tend to occur in America whenever Pluto is interacting with the lunar nodal axis. So that by itself brings a lot of upheaval, but it's going to overlap with America's Uranus return, which begins in the summer of 2027, continues on into the fall, and then also into 2028. So Pluto being conjunct the South Node, transing Uranus being conjunct natal Uranus, both of those things tend to bring about revolutions and big social changes in America. Let's see, we have transing Saturn exactly opposite natal Saturn on March 14th of this year. That is Pi Day 314. Maybe a rather frustrating Pi Day. Then in this period, in this box here, we have a series of aspects by transing Saturn. It'll be conjunct natal Chiron, square natal Mercury, square natal Venus. So wounding, economic frustration, people not feeling good, people in bad health during this period. And then this final box here, it includes transing Uranus, conjunct natal Uranus at Uranus return, which can lead to conflict at home or abroad, and Saturn square Pluto, which usually brings about some restructuring, which is often painful. Could be a lot of economic pain. And then the transiting lunar nodal axis is actually going to be conjunct our natal lunar nodal axis on looks like October 31st of 2027. So whatever's going on, it's going to become much, much more intense around that time. 2027 and 2028 look like the most dangerous years for America to me. And there are times when you just might want to leave the country for an extended vacation if things look too dangerous here. Okay, let's look at some eclipses and a few transits throughout the year. Beginning with the solar eclipse on February 6, 2027, we have Pluto conjunct the lunar nodal axis. That brings about transformations in society. And we have transit Chiron conjunct the Pluto-Mercury midpoint and the Moon-Pluto midpoint. Okay, this is going to be a repeat of something we saw earlier. Where did we see that earlier? Let's go back. Take a quick look here. Here. Yeah. It's the lunar eclipse coming up on September 7th, 2025. We're going to have transit Chiron conjunct Mercury-Pluto midpoint and square Moon-Pluto midpoint. So pay attention to what happens in September, either at the time of this lunar eclipse or any time in the month of September, because we are repeating that same astrological configuration on February 6, 2027, when we might get a similar kind of result. Most likely we'll experience something similar happening around this time. So pay attention to what happens in September of this year, 2025. Let's see, we have a lunar eclipse, February 20th, 2027. We still have Pluto conjunct the lunar nodal axis and Chiron square natal Pluto. So we've talked about what that means. Big social transformations, wounding of the presidency, and America's power. And on March 14th, we have transiting Saturn in opposition to natal Saturn. It's exact on the 14th. It's going to be in effect throughout the middle part of March. Okay. On March 17th, transiting Pluto will be exactly conjunct the south node, lunar node, and transiting Saturn is still going to be strongly in opposition to natal Saturn. So intense things going on, a lot of frustration, a lot of paying off of karmic debts. America will have to face the consequences of its past actions, for better or worse. And let's see, on June 30th, 2027, we have transiting Pluto, again, exactly conjunct this lunar nodal axis. And transiting Saturn is going to be square natal Pluto, suggesting some restrictions on America's power and or Donald Trump's power, the president's power. Okay, this is a day I am particularly worried about. It's a lunar eclipse, July 18th, 2027. But look at how exact these harsh aspects are. Saturn is at 27 degrees Aries, square Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn. Uranus is at 8 degrees Gemini, conjunct natal Uranus at 8 degrees Gemini. Pluto is at 6 degrees Aquarius, conjunct the south node at 6 degrees Aquarius. The tensions at this point are going to be very, very strong. Tensions that lead us toward social transformation, restrictions of power, and that tendency to get involved with conflict, either abroad or at home. So if I want to pick one month to go out of the country, this would probably be it. Now, on the 21st of that month, uh, let's see, it says here, transiting Uranus square natal Uranus. That should be conjunct. Sorry, I thought I changed that. I'll have to change it after the fact. So, transiting Uranus would be exactly conjunct natal Uranus on the 21st. Of course, we still have Pluto conjunct the lunar nodal axis and Saturn still square natal Pluto. Tensions are still high on the 21st. So 18th, 21st, that's a very tense period for America. Again, I'm trying to figure out where my wife and I will go on vacation. I'd like to be out of the country during that month. Solar eclipse on August 2nd, 2027. We still have Pluto conjunct the lunar nodal axis and transiting Saturn still square natal Pluto. So as you see, these aspects, these themes, they're lasting for a while. These tensions are going to be with us. It's not just they're here one day and gone the next. And on November 8th, 2027, we will have, let's see, transiting Uranus conjunct natal Uranus. Again, it's going to be exact on this day. The transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis. That should really intensify everything. That will probably be interesting. And transiting Venus will be strongly opposite natal Uranus. This is going to act as a trigger around this time. So something could break around this time. This might be another good day to take a vacation. Now, when we get into 2028, there are going to be 3 times that transiting Pluto is exactly conjunct the south node in opposition to the north node. You can see it's going to be pretty much constant from August through December. Exactly what kind of social changes, transformations will occur, at this point, I can't say. But something's got to give during this period. We have this period in March where Saturn makes several squares to Mercury, to the Moon, and to Pluto. So, again, a lot of frustration for the economy, for people, and for the presidency. Not only will Pluto be conjunct the lunar nodal axis throughout this year, but the transiting lunar nodal axis, it's going to be conjunct natal Pluto in April. So that just continues things. And we get one more exact conjunction of transiting Uranus with natal Uranus in May. So this is going to last from roughly second half of April through all of May. And then we have more aspects involving either the natal lunar nodal axis or the transiting lunar nodal axis. Chiron square north node and south node. Saturn square north and south node. North and south node square Chiron, and north and south node square Saturn. Okay, so this will be, needless to say, a very interesting time for America. And America has this opposition between Saturn and Chiron in both the July 2nd and July 4th, 1776 charts. At its best, with Chiron in Aries, Saturn in Libra, at its best, America recognizes the spiritual worth and dignity of each individual and tries to make that realization, tries to weave it into the structure of our relationships with others. That is America at its best. But at its worst, that opposition shows ways in which we tend to wound others and try and control others. So, everything in America's chart involving Saturn and Chiron is going to be greatly stimulated in May and June of 2028, and mostly October and November later on that year. Okay. Now, if we look at the eclipses for 2028, transiting Pluto and Mars are both going to be conjunct that lunar nodal axis. You can see everything is at 6 degrees, 6 degrees, 6 degrees. And transiting Saturn is going to be conjunct natal Chiron at the same time. With Mars joining in with Pluto, this could be very militaristic at this point. And it could involve a lot of wounding, a lot of frustration. So that is on January 11th, 2028. Let's go back here for a second. The conjunction of Pluto with the South Node, that becomes exact on January 21st. And here I've got the chart for that. Okay. And we have a solar eclipse on January 26th, and Pluto is still very strongly conjunct that lunar nodal axis. On May 9th, these are transits. Uranus will be exactly conjunct natal Uranus. And the transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be pretty strongly conjunct this Moon-Mercury opposition. So again, people are going to be ready to revolt. Their feelings, their left brains are going to be greatly intensified by the lunar nodal axis. People may be protesting a lot. There may be violence in the streets, civil war. We'll have to wait and see. On July 8th, 2028, looking at the transits, transiting Chiron, let's see, it's going to be right here. It's going to be square transiting Pluto. It will be exact. This is a transit to transit square. And the inside chart I'm looking at here, this time I'm looking at the July 4th, 1776 Sibley chart for America. And this chart will have transiting Jupiter conjunct natal Neptune. And it's going to be making a very strong square to natal Mars. And transiting Mars is going to be conjunct natal Mars. And transiting Mars will be square natal Neptune. And you can see Saturn and Chiron, the transiting planets are conjunct, and Chiron's making exact square to transiting Pluto. So perhaps a time of violence, frustration, wounding for the world, but Chiron square Pluto, that often results in healing for the world too. But for America, it's the natal square between Neptune and Mars, which is really being stimulated at this point. Jupiter is magnifying it. Transiting Mars is adding fuel to the fire. So this could be a day of violence in America. Let's see, on November 20th, 2028, transiting Pluto is once again exactly conjunct that lunar nodal axis. And the transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be strongly squaring natal Chiron. So transformation of society, wounding to America, doesn't look so great. And if I look at transits on, let's see, October 24th, 2028, we have transiting Chiron and Saturn square natal, or square transiting Pluto. Sorry. And Chiron square Pluto, that's going to be exact on that date. We have Saturn still a part of it, and that's what we've seen previously, I believe. Yeah, here on July 8th. And let's see, that transiting Chiron Saturn square will square the natal lunar nodal axis, and transiting Pluto is conjunct the lunar nodal axis pretty strongly. On, let's see, November 15th of 2028, we have transiting Pluto conjunct the lunar nodal axis, and that is going to be exact. And transiting Saturn and Chiron are square the lunar nodal axis also. We have a lunar eclipse on the 31st, and the transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be squaring natal Saturn, so that will intensify some of the tendencies of America to control others or intensify frustration in America. Let me go back here just a second. Yeah, so we had a lunar eclipse, solar eclipse at the beginning. We got another lunar eclipse right at the end of the year. So the solar eclipse will happen soon after in January of 2029. Now, in 2029, a lot of things are going to calm down for America. And the eclipse charts aren't going to be interacting with America's charts so strongly. So, for the most part, in 2029, I'm going to be looking at just showing you the eclipse charts. There are a lot of eclipses in 2029. I think we have about 6 eclipses. The first one is well organized, but the others are not so well organized. You know, just a trine here, a square there, but not getting into a tight pattern involving 3 or more planets. So I'm not as worried about 2029 for America or the world, even though I know that Russia is going to be undergoing a lot of its own tense transits in 2028 and 2029. 2027, 2028 will probably be the most intense years for America, but Russia is going to go through its own upheavals, and it has a history of undergoing big changes whenever Saturn and Neptune come into conjunction. So between now and 2029, the end of 2029, I am expecting a lot of changes to occur in Russia. And so always a big question, is Putin's grip on power strong enough that he can withstand those changes, or will a tsunami of changes sweep him out of power and change the face of Russia? We'll just have to wait and see. But in 2029, if we look at transits to the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, we have the lunar nodal axis is going to be conjunct Jupiter for a while. That could actually be beneficial if it stimulates growth. But we have a period here where transiting Neptune is going to be squaring natal Sun. It looks like May, June, July, August into September. of 2029, and that can bring about a certain amount of fanaticism in America and passionate beliefs about things. Also, disinformation, misinformation. And let me just go back quickly to the very beginning here, because I think what we saw, let's see, yeah, when we were looking at the progressions, progress Sun in opposition to Neptune in 2028 and 2029, and we go back to 2029, and what do we see? Transiting Neptune square the Sun for quite a bit, so the tense interaction between Sun and Neptune is happening astrologically in two different ways and will be at its strongest in June, July, and August of 2029. Okay, this is a transit to transit. We have Saturn conjunct Chiron. That is going to be exact, I think, in 2028 and early Taurus, I believe about 6 degrees of Taurus. But we have transiting Saturn square, transiting Pluto, transiting Neptune square the lunar nodal axis. Into March, beginning of February, that's tense time for the world. And transiting Chiron and Pluto square one another in May, June, and December of that year. But historically, that seems to be just as likely to bring about healing as it does wounding for the world. These are things that will affect the world that year. Now, the first solar eclipse of this year, it's rather well organized because we have this grand trine between Mars, Pluto, and Uranus, and we have, looks like Sun and Moon and Jupiter making sesquiquadrats to Uranus and Gemini. Because of the grand trine, the sesquiquadrats, they create a little tension, a little stress. They're not as strong as a square, but they can be a breaking point, a turning point. And with Uranus and Gemini, this could be beneficial. It could be a turning point with regard to creativity and invention. We also have a T-square with Mars opposite Neptune, squaring Venus. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. It could be misinformation and an excess of testosterone affecting people's nonverbal right brains, making them a little bit more violent, more aggressive than usual. But we also have some good aspects that help release some of those tensions. But this first eclipse is fairly well organized with respect to various things. But when we get into the other eclipses, things are a little bit more scattered. The organization is not quite as good. We have this interesting Chiron, square Pluto, sextile Neptune, semi-sextile Chiron, which is a little stronger. And squares tell us when drives are not coordinating their functions well. So Pluto wants to transform things, Chiron wants to transcend things. They're not coordinating together well. But Neptune, which wants to just dissolve the boundaries between things, it can make it is working well with Pluto, so it's getting this transformative visions, but it has to make some sort of adjustments before transcendence can occur. And This may create a tension, which does bring some good visions into physical manifestation. But we'll have to wait and see on that. And there's another similar triangle with Chiron, sextile Venus, square Neptune, again, semi-sextile Chiron. So, something may be born out of this period. There may be a tension that leads to a difficult but a beneficial birth of some sort. This one is not quite as well organized as June 25th lunar eclipse. And likewise, the July 11th solar eclipse is not as well organized. So we still have that square, sextile, semi-sextile going on between Chiron, Pluto, and Neptune. Perhaps this will be a year in which we go through the labor pains and difficult birth to bring in breathe some new life into the world, bring in something healing and beneficial to the world. And we got the solar eclipse on December 5th, 2029. And again, this Chiron, Pluto, Neptune triangle, the square, the sextile, the semi-sextile, it's still going pretty strong. There's a lunar eclipse on December 20th, and that triangle is still pretty strong. That's the last slide. Let's go back. For each of these eclipses, we have that same triangular configuration between Chiron, Pluto, and Neptune present. It's not there so much on the January 14th solar eclipse. But once we get past that one, once we get into the summer, through the rest of the year, it's there. That could bring about wounding. But the hope is that it, after a difficult birth, some labor pains, it brings about some healing for the world. And of course, these astrological configurations, they nudge us in certain directions, but their influence is not so strong that they cannot be mitigated for better or worse using free will. So we can take this as an opportunity. We don't have to be passive with regard to any of these astrological aspects. We can focus on the most beneficial type of outcome, and then we can work to consciously manifest that. And when we see times that are particularly tense, we can take precautions so that we remain safe. Okay, and that is the last slide for this presentation. I'll stop sharing. So, as you can see, there are interesting times ahead for America. It's going to be a rocky road for the next few years. I'm expecting that for America, tensions will build in 2026. They could reach a peak in 2027, 2028. There could be violence in America, or we could engage in conflict or wars abroad if we don't make better choices. In 2029, the tensions on America will begin to subside. They'll still be strong in Russia in 2028 and 2029, but there is a potential for the world to give birth to something new in 2029 that will be very healing. But if we don't work consciously toward a beneficial outcome, then it could be a wounding for the world in 2029. So, very, very interesting times for the world and very, very interesting times for America. Things are very tense in America right now as we see a lot of our democratic structures and structures of government being dismantled by the current administration, and things could reach a peak for America in 2027, 2028, and probably become worse in 2026. If we can make it through this rough period, then we and the world may eventually find ourselves in a better future. But for now, uh, there'll definitely be some difficulties ahead, but exactly how those difficulties manifest, that depends upon the choices that each of us make. And we'll have to wait until we get closer to the astrological events in order to be able to see more clearly what will likely happen as a physical outcome. Okay, I hope you found that informative. I hope you always listen to your higher self and always try and make good choices as we move into the future. And I hope you join me for future videos. But for now, I'll just say so long and be well.